Anyone here remember the band Bright Eyes? Like, they're still making music. After The People's Key was released, reportedly the supposed end of the band, with the frontrunner Conor Oberst moving to work on his other projects, there's this new album that was released in 2020. It's good. I liked it. I didn't listen to it until a few weeks ago because when I transitioned, I had this idea in my head to kind of shed everything I listened to and try and expand and radically change my music taste. You know, gone were the Decemberists, Bright Eyes, Amanda Palmer, Arcade Fire, and so on. You know, I started listening to Hop Along and Mitski and Pup until, the trauma. So, it was weird, Ensemble, returning to Bright Eyes after all these years. A very different person. Different even from, the baby trans that I was. The girl that was brutally dismissive of Oberst's work, once I'd been subjected to, gender trouble. I felt his, morose white guy stuff to be kind of tiring. That was mean of me, actually. Bright Eyes is fine. It's why now I find myself... What, the cat thing? Yeah, I'm a cat on the internet. Keep up. I was a cat girl. I talked a lot in my last music essay and in my Echo and Adastra and Arches vids about myself and my identity and my struggles with feeling like an outsider to everything. And then I got it in my head to stop lounging in my misery and do something about it. So I'm a cat now. I don't know. This is my apology to fans that were maybe expecting another furry VN essay this month. Meow meow, bitch. Anyway, this is why I find myself writing this essay about Canadian composer and songwriter Owen Pallett. Let's see. I ran into them opening for the Arcade Fire when I went to see them live, and I'll get into exactly how cool their live shows are, but it was enough to compel me to dig through their old work. I listened to Heartland, the first studio album released under their own name. Their previous band moniker was, oh, hey, Final Fantasy. And their work became, important to me. Their work is, to be clear, often relentlessly nerdy, hence the previous band moniker, but we're talking about a very, very high concept idea of a concept album. The album Heap Whose Clouds, for example, is a collection of vignettes about mundane people written through the fantastical language of D&D spellcasting. The song An Arrow in the Side of Final Fantasy from their first studio album, Has a Good Home, is set to the musical riff from Super Mario Land 2's Star Maze theme. Heartland is a concept album about a 14th century fictional world dubbed Spectrum, created by a god named Owen Pallett. But fascinatingly, this wasn't a direct line to how I fashioned myself, lyrically or thematically as a young musician. I was still writing that Bright Eyes style of expressing all of my personal anguish via song, but Pallett's music did make me both buy a loop pedal and a pitch shifter, and a violin off of a friend that, I wound up breaking that violin a few months later, but, And then I let them go. Around 2014, 2015, I kind of shed most of the musicians that I listened to, trying to really push myself into a different place, be a different person. That idea, that desire to reincarnate myself entirely was huge for me at the start of my transition. I wanted to not be my dead name. I wanted to be a different musician, a different artist, a different kind of thinker. And it was finding new, strange acoustic performances of their work that led me to, in the year of our Lord 2023, finding out that 3 years ago they released Island, and also came out as non-binary. And I've listened to Island a few times now, and I found myself grappling with a strange thought. I don't know who this artist is now. So before we really begin here, I want to talk about how good and weird Owen Pallett's old stuff is. I know that this runs the risk of sounding dismissive of their new work, and I should be clear before I bury the lead too much that Island is very good, and I do like it. But this goes beyond the album itself. But okay, to begin, Owen Pallett's work is a little hard to parse because they do a lot of meaningfully distinct things in the music world. So as a composer and arranger for bands like Pet Shop Boys, Arcade Fire, and Taylor Swift, their arrangements are good, but often kind of work to complement the vision of the music. You're not listening to the string arrangements in Neon Bible and thinking, this is very Owen Pallett. they're a good team player as an arranger for other musicians. Great. Their solo work? Well, okay, that's also kind of weird to discuss. If you want a good kind of vertical slice of it, their first album, Has a Good Home, was reportedly rushed to record and produce in time, according to one of the main supporting characters of this weird video essay. Alpentine.com, the fan website for Owen Pallett's work that seems to not have updated since the release and reception of In Conflict. If any of you who run the site are watching this, we are so back, babes. Due to its limited time frame and whatnot, the work feels at times rough on delivery, but the limitation tips the hand of their creative vision. They're very into big compositions for their work, but without the kind of scope and budget and time that's seen in He Poos Clouds or Heartland, this often results in windows into their live performances. The musician themselves, their violin, and some technology to loop and adjust the sound and tone of their violin, you know. This isn't a novel thing, mind you. As early as their first album, the comparison to Andrew Bird, who also sings and plays violin and loops it, has been drawn, though, alright, so I don't really have friends who know and like Owen Pallett. Like, most of the friends who know of them do so because I have yelled at them, about them for, you know, years, and they really only know things that I tell them. I have, like, no outside connection to fans of their work. If you're a part of Alpentine.com, I don't know, please talk to me. I just want to talk. So, okay, instead, I have to introduce the second supporting character of this weird video essay. Pitchfork, the music publication that I have an intensely hot and cold relationship with. I feel like my reaction to their reviews are far from unique. I think Pitchfork is great when they agree with me, and a bunch of elitist hacks when they disagree with me. Maturity. A lot of my attempts to broadly contextualize my relationships with this particular musician is just going to have to be facilitated through me picking fights with Pitchfork reviews of very old albums. I am so sorry. Listen to Owen Pallett and talk to me about them, please. Look, I have no beef with Andrew Bird. I've listened to some of his stuff. It's fine. It's fun. Sure. He doesn't... I don't know. It's just not the same. It's very clean in a way that Pallett's music isn't. The Pitchfork review calls Bird's work elegant, even, and I prefer the mess. See, I started working on this essay because, as I've started my very embarrassing journey of trying to learn music theory by looking up terms and basic ideas on the internet and asking really embarrassing questions to people who know way more than me, I reached a decision that Owen Pallett kind of wants to make a noise album. Like, even as early on as Has a Good Home, beyond the whimsical little loops, their delicate, soft twink voice, the specter of chaos lingers in the fringes of their work. Dissonance, fuzzy ambient noise, all of this creeps into this album. You know, look at tracks like Library and Furniture and Please, Please, Please.
Your head is shouting, please, 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 please.
I'd identify that fascination with dissonance and ambient noise to be some of the more defining qualities of their work, especially considering that it, far more than looping recursive violin arrangements, bleeds into their composition work for other musicians. Okay, I've been having fun. We should probably look at an album that they had more time and budget to handle, right? Sure. Okay. Pallett's second studio album, He Poos Clouds, centers them in a string quartet and brings up the diverging paths of talking about their work. I think that one of the bigger struggles in clearly defining the nature of Pallett's music is that, well, on some level, the most easily accessible form of their work are these studio albums. And, like, I listened to this thing. You know, it's huge, grand. Like, this isn't the cute, soft loops and layers. This isn't the star song from Mario. This is dark and textured and just has a lot going on. Some of the basic 8-bar loop structure is there in this album, but it feels more like, well, you know, like played with a band, a string quartet in this case. You know, there's a lot of other instrumentation, shouting, the kind of dissonant chaos is still present in this album, but the focus has shifted hard. Pallett is trying to craft a specific sound here, and that specific sound has a specific theme. You know, 8 of the track names are references to different schools of magic and D&D, and these songs speak about ordinary people going on dates, developing fictional crushes, working their jobs, thinking about suicide, you know, normal things, but imbues these mundanities with this sweeping, fantastical bent.
Shields up, bar the door, and keep your dukes up. Tell lies, tell dirty lies, tell diggory lies, till you're lying in his bed.
But, like, here's the thing. Pallett has to perform these live, and sure, you can tour with a string quartet, and sometimes they do perform with, like, an orchestra or with other musicians on stage, but here's where we introduce the new supporting cast member of this horrible essay, Owen Pallett, comma, live.
Shields up, bar the door, and keep your dukes up. Tell lies, tell diggory lies, tell jiggery lies, till you're lying in his bed.
This is Owen Pallett at Café de la Danse. I honestly am obsessed with this filmed live performance of their work. Maybe it's the mixing. They favor the pitch-shifted bass a lot, and it's just thick. It's delicious. I can't get enough, but more importantly, this is kind of the captivating appeal to their work. You know, Has a Good Home blurred the line between their mind as a composer for a full album of music and their performance as a solo artist, but that line is made crystal clear in Hupu's Clouds, where a song like Many Lives 49 MP can feel big and dangerous and patiently menacing, evenly metered, following along with the quartet as people scream in the background.
Hey Timothy, I wish for clairvoyance. I want to see my wife and kids and how I would live, how I would die.
But like here, live and alone, they do this. Sorry, I had to pause writing this to go listen to this performance again. It's frenetic, manic. They shout into their violin to loop their voice through the microphone there. It's so good. The vocals and the bass are huge in the mix, and the strings just go fucking nuts to overwhelm even those. You know, from time to time, Pallett's music enters into this kind of all-encompassing big sound. Where all the loops are going nuts and they're soloing on top of it all, and the cumulative effect is, frankly, incredible. This is, at the heart of it, considering everyone I know who likes Owen Pallett, so, you know, me, and some of the writers at Pitchfork sometimes, the central appeal of their work. Their live shows have this infectious energy to them, watching the performer make not just an entire string section out of one violin, but to see them put their heart into it. There's this video of a live performance of one of their songs off the next album that's happening during like a brutal storm. You know, attendants are trying to coax them off the stage, and they go, "Let me finish the song!" And it's just captivating. Like, they're a remarkable performer to see. I mean, I'm writing this video essay because once, 18,000 years ago, I saw them perform live and remember that performance more than the Arcade Fire, one of my favorite bands at the time. Does it get better than this? Heartland, the first studio album Pallett released under their own name, is kind of the pinnacle of the ideas both mechanically and thematically explored in the previous piece. It's grand, massive, they're recording with a full orchestra, all while composing with enough space to slip their keyboard and violin into the sweeping arrangements. You know, thematically, well, like if Hupu's Clouds was peeking into little lives and is speaking about them in fantastical terms, Heartland is a fictional tale about a farmer named Lewis living in a fictional 14th century world named Spectrum. We kind of already talked about this. Ruled by a god named Owen Pallett. Lewis starts the album as a regular farmer, receiving a divine call to action into Owen's service, where his travels working on his behalf lead to a crisis of faith. Then he confronts his god at the peak of Mount Alpentine, where he stabs him in the eyes with an iron spike, pushes him off a mountain, and urinates on him. So, yeah. The vibe's a little different. Pallett also cites Roland Barthes as part of the inspiration for writing an album about a very literal death of a very literal author. Allegedly. Look, Alpentine.com's link to the source is dead. I don't know what to tell you guys. This is the album that I listened to first, mostly because it was the first one under their own name, and I missed their time as Final Fantasy, just like how I missed playing any Final Fantasy game ever on release. God, my life is a fucking sham. Look, the album is great, and circling back to my newfangled, unhinged pet theory, you can see dissonance and chaos in Heartland, but through the filter of a full orchestra. But the real pinnacle of this piece, I think the song of theirs that truly struck home to me the most would probably be this. The Great Elsewhere opened in a way that I just never heard from music at the time. Bold, suddenly dropping into this goofy little synth progression, this kind of stuttering effect like the track was damaged somehow, lending itself to the premise of the song, the big revelatory encounter with Lewis's fiction Owen god. It's big and open at the start, sparse words just honing into the minimal sounds, starting to filter in, and then the way the song builds itself piece by piece, the sleight of hand transition from synth keys to piano when you weren't looking, all of this works in tandem with the big confrontation that, in the narrative of the album, is the big turn away from God. It's just kind of perfect. Like, the lyrics bloom outwards also, starting from reduced, simple, poetic exclamations. To big, weighty paragraphs of detail. According to an interview posted to a blog called Radio Free Canuckistan, Pallett wrote the song in 11/16, and then transitions it into a standard 4/4 by overpowering the synth progression with a drum kit, like literally wrestling the meter of the song into place. It's incredible. There's genuinely so much more to like and dig into this album. Like it came out in 2010, and it is this big high concept nightmare, but also relentlessly queer in like a distinctly confrontational way. This isn't like a curated, sanitized queer epic. Lewis is a big old hetero man who has like a gay awakening by running into Twink God and killing him. Goals, I think. I don't know, this was such a high point in my life, musically speaking, and like, most of the people I talked to about it either didn't care or actively disliked their music, which, you know, to be fair, is like catnip for a pretentious theater kid. Like, it couldn't get much better than this, right? Except that it did. The next album is genuinely my favorite album of theirs, and it doesn't really have, like, a lot to do with this video, so I don't really feel like I can talk about it, but like, I don't know, who the fuck is even watching this? Like, no one in my audience, as far as I know, even knows Owen Pallett. This video is for me. Look, I'm gonna do it. I'll be quick. I'm gonna just let me... In Conflict, Pallett's fourth studio album is incredible. It is a huge departure. Like, the last two albums have this sense of trying to flow from one song to the next. There's a couple of songs that are tiny little, like, connective tissue pieces to bridge the tone shifts. In Conflict was made to try and swing wildly from song to song. Where Heartland was this big, ornate, high-concept fantasy story, In Conflict is deeply personal and at times kind of despairing. Where Pallett was making a noise album through like an orchestra, In Conflict has a digital focus, electronics, filters, Brian Eno. Like, look at this live performance from my favorite song of the album.
game.
This album came out in 2014, and it was just great. I remember trying to force my parents to listen to it, explaining that this is unlike any album of theirs before. I don't know, maybe I'll do like a bonus video that's just talking about this. Sorry, I love this album. It's very dear to my heart. It has fucking neo pronouns in it. And in 2014, when cis people were just learning about Laverne Cox, God. And then I started shedding all of the musicians in my life. I wanted to reinvent myself. I already told you all this, and it was hearing my favorite song from In Conflict stripped down on a guitar that made me revisit their work. And this... Island was an album that, according to what I've been able to dig up on the internet, was in construction before the pandemic apocalypse, only to be released in the height of it. Heartland came out a decade prior, featuring this large-scale, fantastical world and a fantasy hero who goes on a pretty standard journey. He's summoned by his god for a divine purpose, has a crisis of faith, rejects his faith, kills God. You know, it's very JRPG, but Island picks up on this story now, talking about the total instability of the world without Owen. Lewis leaves the Heartland behind him, washing up on a small island now relatively unknown for his grim actions, and descends into the agony of living life rejected by everyone he once knew. The tone musically is different. Pallett centers folk guitar and sparse orchestration and moody piano vibes. You know, the album cover art depicts their face, partially obscured by shadow, in contrast to Heartland's monochrome portrayal of a figure that, you know, kind of looks like he could be our main character. The album is, on many, many levels, a departure, and a thought that I had at first blush was simply, how could you do this to me? This foundational part of my musical vocabulary from my younger years seemingly abandoned their violin in favor of a guitar, like Lewis abandoned his scythe to become a drunken waste. I've left and returned to this artist, and I'm not even human on the internet anymore, and they've come back to me non-binary and with a guitar. This is kind of where part of me was coming into this new album. I don't know who they are, and this isn't what I'm here for. Or is it? I've listened to Island multiple times in preparation for writing this video, and it keeps on gently opening up more and more with every listen. Lewis was once on a kind of tongue-in-cheek hero's journey back in 2010, and picking up with him again in 2020, things are different. You know, the arc of this narrative is broken. This isn't a story that's here to provide a general progression through a conflict that reveals things and brings us closer to the character and is resolved nicely. This is taking our monomythic hero after his journey and watching him crumble. Rejected from everyone, he winds up in this strange new place that's also uncaring, also kind of dismissive of him. You know, Lewis is gay now. Like, he starts to feel Owen's presence once more, like his enemy god's back for some wretched direct-to-VHS sequel. But he rejects what may have been in any other circumstance a renewed call to action. Lewis, in this fiction, has no external opposing force to weigh himself against. You know, no god to worship, no enemy to vanquish. He's in a world that is just kind of holding itself together now, uncaring about the grandiosity of his legacy. The album's opening bout of lyrics show him leaving his home behind, and the next piece, one of the highlights, Paragon of Order, is filled with this almost ominous optimism, this feeling that a new place could be a new beginning, a revival of his image and his purpose, and the lyrics are quietly obsessed with his own reflections of his actions.
In the hollow distance, a man tried to be kind. God kill us alive.
At this point, I actually want to talk about strings. See, in the text of both Heartland and Island, Owen, the god, is referred to also as the Great White Noise, which, like, I don't know, at least one way to think about that is kind of a cute title to put upon a god of a world made out of a musician's mind. Like, sure, but, you know, also, like, noise. The swelling, heavy, oppressive orchestral sounds that have mostly marked by these powerful strings. Now, Okay, so here's a fun little trick they pull in the final 2 tracks of Heartland. See, the penultimate tryst with Mephistopheles is the story beat where Lewis stabs Owen to death, and then the next track, What Do You Think Will Happen Next, has no strings, no orchestra, no great white noise. The speaker is left in a quiet world of synth sounds, ruminating. It's great. When we get to Island, we only start hearing strings again when Lewis starts speaking. And it's interesting, because the first time he does, Pallett does this thing where the strings kind of bloom and extend through the lyrics and taper off.
When I wish I was never born.
It's a trick that keeps on popping up here and there through the album. The kind of peeled back folk aesthetic getting interrupted as the orchestra creeps around in the periphery, like Owen is looming still, which, you know, they are. Lewis feels lost and starts to sense Owen's presence here, and it drives him kind of mad, descending into the centerpiece of Island. A Bloody Morning is in many ways the antithesis of Heartland's Great Elsewhere, detailing Lewis getting drunk and piloting his ship into the reefs, causing a crash and waking up to a feeling of Owen's forgiveness. Even now. The song kind of cannibalizes the Great Elsewhere's arc, where Lewis confronts Owen for there being violence and death in this world and is struck by his god's indifference to it all, where Elsewhere builds and builds and the synthetic and orchestral sounds wrestle each other. Bloody Morning crashes headlong into its dismal, pounding soundscape, giving brief little pockets for Lewis to recount his story and counterpointing the pinnacle of it.
And we lay stand or fall, and the passengers are tumbling over rail and overboard and into sea.
Both songs function as a crisis point for Lewis, losing his faith in God, and now, 10 years later, losing faith in himself. At this point in the narrative, he already knows that no one wanted Owen dead, and that Owen has forgiven him for the violence that alienated him from his heartland. And now what? The scariest thing about Island from this perspective is the unsettling refusal to give a typical narrative closure to this. Lewis cannot reconcile this, that he has caused so much harm and has wounded the world around him. And the one he inflicted this harm onto has not only forgiven him, but they have unreal, bizarre space sex at the climactic track, aptly named Lewis Gets Fucked into Space. And now, the true fans who are inexplicably still here listening to this video, we will talk about the sex scene in this album, because there's kind of another thing going on here. Lewis was, in Heartland, an amalgam of things that Pallett found fascinating in men, if the notes from Alpentine.com are to be trusted. Lewis was a character that was supposed to be a meaningful counterpart to their own role in the story, God. You know, in Island, the song Paragon of Order notes the relative humanizing and softening of Lewis.
My muscles softened since I washed up here, and I traded the side for a sink and a bottle of beer.
And this is, in part, important to the narrative as we talked about it, but it's deeper than that. It's also integration. Lewis is no longer an external figure, but a reflection of the author, as he kind of always has been. Heartland is very much a bizarre look at the purpose and intention of authorship, Pallett toying with the concept that every picture is a self-portrait, but just as they set themselves very explicitly in the narrative, Lewis is just as much a character study on Pallett as Owen is. And in Island, we can see this reflection start to take hold. Lewis introduces strings back into the soundscape of this album. He speaks about his god like an ex-lover and firemare, and the sex they have is very specific in its detail.
When I regain my consciousness, it's crawling up the spine. There's something in me now that is not mine. It touches nervous system crystalline, flowing stabbed him into fingers I am the vine.
Very specifically, the lyrics are discussing this kind of interweaving of Owen and Lewis. Sexual, primal, but also cerebral, internal. They're becoming one, literally, metaphorically, and thematically. The album denouements with In Darkness, which is a reintroduction to the faith now shared between God and subject, serving not so much a traditional hero closure beat, but as a deeper, more intimate reconciliation.
You don't need to die to be forgiven. You don't need to be a slave to your desire.
And I gotta ask now, I don't know, isn't this my story here too? Like, I'm not the author of any of these works, obviously I'm just a fan, but like, this music has this significant connection in my life, and I left it all behind. And like, I don't know, look at what I've been doing. I've spent months rediscovering myself. I've changed my own self-image, the way I want people to see me, and as different and new and strange as I am now, I've also been digging through my past desperately. See, I tricked you. This is a video about being a furry. Go fuck yourself. I should explain. See, the Echo Project games all did many things to my brain, and that's all well and good, but one of the hanging threads was that I had, in my efforts to reinvent myself, ignored a big, significant part of my personal life, something that I was already deeply ashamed of, but was now trying to, like, completely redefine myself out of. And that wound that was reopened was just going to fester until I did something about it, until I looked inward at my past, and in doing so, I found this figure from it, this fucking musician who had been going through similar things, it seems. And my efforts to try and push away from them, from their work, you know, the feeling that on some level I'm owed Owen Pallett as I left them in 2014, a perfect crystalline memory of them, and not this different, older, non-binary guitar player. You know, I wanted... I don't know, I wanted Bright Eyes, you know? Their newest album is fun and solid, and I liked it, but I opened it and it felt just like a Bright Eyes album. You know, it was comforting that in the almost 10 years since I thought about Bright Eyes, Connor Oberst is doing his thing, and confronting a different Owen Pallett made me think not just about, you know, growing old and recognizing that other people also grow old, but like, why have that impulse at all? You know, Owen Pallett owes me nothing, and the initial sense of betrayal is something I don't even feel anymore. Island is great. The reworking of their songs and the live performances are different, but God, The Great Elsewhere, Song for 5 and 6, Riverbed, like, they're all still incredible to hear in this new way. I think that ultimately, looking at a musician from your past and seeing something strange and different, something that reminds you that your memories of art and artists are not fixed elements, but are themselves aging, changing things, can be scary and melancholy. On some level, I've lost something in revisiting their work. I've lost the kind of timeless, crystalline idea of who they were, because that's not them anymore. And for what it's worth, I'm not the person I was back then either. But I do kind of want to buy a violin now. Special thanks to Alexi Angelica, Bees the One, Caitlin Fisher, Colleen T., Evan Kearns, Gail Simmons, Lewis Wells, Lores, Maria Aladren, Narai the Redmarked, Professor Bopper, St. Rawberry, Thomas Wolpez, and Zetetic. Thank you all so much.